the reason why I wrote this article was because I was for those who don't know, the article was about like NBA, kids of NBA players who have, why so many kids of NBA players are the top prospects in high school right now, and why so many of them make the league, right? And most of that is genetics, we can say. But
I'll interject and talk over you like an idiot and say you made the great point that it's easy to say it's genetics, but it wasn't as genetic before. So something socially has clearly happened.
So like in 2005, I believe, maybe it was 2009. There was 10 players who are the kids of NBA players, right? In the league. And now there is 35. So you have like a 350% increase. Now you can say that's a small sample size, and I would somewhat agree with you. But before that, the number was very static. And then it was always 7 to 9 to 10, something like that. Tom Haberstroh did a lot of research on this for writing articles a couple of years ago that I thought were quite good. And then it jumps. And then the thing that is happening is like you can have a one-time jump and say that that's within, some sort of statistical noise. The thing is that if you look at all the top ranks of the high school players right now, it's even more ex-NBA players, right? And so it means that number will most likely go up to the point where you could have a scenario where like in the starting five of almost every single team in the NBA here in like 10, 15 years, you might have one kid of an NBA player, 20% of the league, something like that might be, because the 20% of the league would just be 80, right? It would just basically be a doubling. And so that's basic. That was, why is this happening? I was looking into it. If it's only genetics, then that means that why didn't this happen 20 years ago? Right? Like what the number of NBA teams and roster spots hasn't gone up that much since like the Magic and the Heat and the Timberwolves have put into the league, right? We've had one expansion team since then. And so my theory, or the thing that I talk to a lot of NBA players about, or ex-NBA players, ex-professional athletes, is that basically there's a bottleneck that's been created now by the cost of elite training, exposure, right? How people get noticed at young ages. You basically have to pay into that system too. And that as you go through life and as you go through this system, the kids with more resources have a small advantage every single time. And at some point, all those advantages accumulate, and then you have what it looks like today, which is that you have a mostly upper middle class to wealthy group of player pool in high school. And that translates over into college, obviously, which then translates over into the NBA. So that's basically my working thesis. And I went out and talked to Jermaine O'Neal, who coaches his son at one of these basketball academies. And, he's extremely thoughtful about this. And one thing that I found that was so interesting was that the NBA players who had made like hundreds of millions, this is like Steve Nash, Luka, Jermaine O'Neal. Like, it's not like fringe players, right? Even LeBron in a podcast had talked about this, which is just, they feel the same way. They don't know why their kids are doing all of this, right? They don't know what all this is for. And in fact, they kind of hate it, right? And yet they keep doing it, which was, super interesting to me.
I mean, it must work, to what you're saying. It gives you these little advantages through the bottleneck. And it's interesting how some of these players, you can say genetics, but sometimes some of these former NBA players, their kid has a game that does not resemble dad's game and seems to reflect better coaching earlier. Klay Thompson's game does not look like Michael Thompson's game.
Yeah.
He has a shot that was built in the lab. And I got to know Zaza Pachulia a little bit when he was with the Warriors, and I see the stuff he posts on Instagram. He just posted his kid in some tournament, and that kid's playing like a driving Peja Stojakovic. He's not playing like Zaza. And so there's something to the idea of how if you have the resources and the institutional know-how, you can really build your game. There's this other component too where
Peja's kid, though, not to interrupt you, just a dumb basketball interjection. Peja's kid kind of plays like Peja.
He does. But
Yeah,
how could he not?
Andre.
It would be weird. It'd be weird if he didn't. It's weirder for Zaza's kid to play like Peja than Peja's kid to play like Peja. But yes, he plays like Peja.
I had this surreal moment at Cal where I was walking around campus and there's a basketball game that was about to start. And I was talking about Peja Stojakovic because his kid that year was playing at Cal. And then there's a tall man standing in front of me, and he turned around. And it was Peja Stojakovic, and I was like, "Oh, hello."
You think that's my dad?
Terrible story. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
No, it's a good story. I would tell that story had it happened to me. I would then lie though. I would then add a little flourish of a lie. I'd add some line that he said right there instead of just looking at you blankly.
No. You just looked and then walked away. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just and there's this knowledge that builds on knowledge. We didn't have YouTube back in the day as well, and it's just amazing how much. I don't even know what kind of point I'm making. I just like the little vignettes of people caught up in this. Marcus Spears. Yep. Yeah, the NFL analyst whose kid is a big prospect, and it's so professionalized so early. And there's something I disagree, I think, with the idea that it's all for nothing, or I do think it's making the kids better, and that's the problem. I think it works, and that's the problem.
Oh, yeah. I think, look, that leads to a very philosophical question, right? Which I thought we would get to later, but we can just talk about now, which is just like, in basketball, I think it does make the players better at some level. If you watch the finals, I mean, I'll just put it this way. When 12 years ago, when I worked at Grantland, I did a story about Oak Hill Academy, which is, where Kevin Durant, Ty Lawson, Rod Strickland, for Jerry Stackhouse, for a while, they were like the one prep school that had all the kids. I mean, it's a very bizarre place. You have to basically drive 2 hours through like the middle of nothing to get there. I've never been to a more remote place in America in my life. And as far as I could tell, it was like where it was both basketball academy, but it was also kind of like where people whose kids were in a lot of trouble sent their kids, right, to like detox or whatever. I think that's what it was. At least that was the vibe that I got. But I watched their practices for like 2-3 days. And then I went to watch Jermaine O'Neal's similar school in Dallas, and I watched their practice. And the kids are just way better now. And they play at a speed that's crazy, a speed and precision that's crazy. And that is because of all the training and whatever, right? But what I think LeBron and what Steve Nash and what Marcus Spears, what Jermaine O'Neal, basically everyone says, and you can say that this is just like old heads being cranky or whatever. It's just that some of the instincts that they need to learn to play basketball are gone because like they don't know how to actually play in games because all they do is train and then play these like kind of glorified, stupid pickup games. That are very structured and they're only playing against kids exactly their age, right? So LeBron basically said, well, I played outdoors with men and that's where I learned how to do all this stuff because I was getting pushed around. My kids play indoors and they never play against older people. And so they just basically are behaving like robots. Now, I don't know. I think the counter argument to that would be that in the finals this year, you have Shea and Halliburton, who are two players who are very unique, right? Like they're not robots, right? In any type of way, especially Halliburton. He doesn't even know his shot form is so weird and he plays such a weird game. Shea too, he doesn't just shoot threes. He doesn't just do threes and layups or whatever. He does the opposite. He has like a mid-range game. It's, I guess like for me, the jury is still out on whether or not I think it's made more technically amazing players, but I don't know if it's made like better players. And I guess the question I would have is like, does it really matter if the players are better? Like in terms of a fan experiencing the game, right? Like, would you rather watch Allen Iverson or would you rather watch these like a kind of robotic player who can do a bunch of things amazingly? I don't know. Like one example would be like Jared McCain or something like that.
Okay, so you said a lot right there. I'm going to try to hit it point by point. I think that people lie to themselves when they think that what pulls them to a sport is the high level of play. Right. I don't think that's what it is. I think it's the stakes. That's one of the reasons why a lot of people like the NCAA tournament better than pro basketball. I know we talk about all these other cultural aspects to that, but it's just, it's about the stakes of it. And it's funny when people will use this kind of presentism, this look back at the 90s, and they'll talk about how awful the play was back then, as though we were all sitting around complaining about it. We had no idea. We just liked it on its own terms, on its own on its own merits. We didn't have a problem.
We weren't like, what if Charles Oakley shot more threes? Like, that was not a thought that went through our head. Yeah.
He's not spacing the floor. Why don't why doesn't David Robinson pull up from 30? This is so disappointing.
Yeah, exactly. He probably could, honestly, but I'm sorry. Go ahead.
If he was optimized for back in the day. I think there's a homogenization is what you're talking about. And yes, Tyrese Halliburton or Gilgeous Alexander, they will have their unique play. And something similar is being said by Kevin Durant on the LeBron, Steve Nash Mind the Game podcast, which, much as I've tried to resist, I do think is a good podcast.
That's a good podcast,
And Durant was talking about how I can take mid-range shots. That's not a bad shot for me. And the stars, the fulcrum that everything is functioning around, we take those shots. But you guys have to do the drive, kick, three-pointer. So I think it's that the vast majority of the league has this narrow specialty, this narrow game, these marks to hit to get good at. And that's more what we're seeing, where the absolute best players might have some individuality to what they're doing, but everybody else is being trained to hit those marks in the way you're talking about with these kids. Now, the final thing that you said, and I'm surprised you didn't bring this up because I thought it was the most provocative, would I call it an argument? Maybe it's an argument, aspect to your article. And I wish I had the words, your eloquent words. If we are losing this inner city, frankly, black rags to riches element of the NBA, does that matter? That's so elemental to what the sport meant culturally and how people connected to it. And if it's now becoming more of a get really great at violin type of sport, we're losing something. Maybe on balance, you could argue that it's better, but it almost appears as though we're losing this massive cultural component of what basketball meant to Americans.
Right.
And it's just going away absent any lamentation. And if they made He Got Game today, if Spike Lee made it today, it'd just be about a wealthy kid of a player learning how to get good at basketball.
Right. Or Jesus Shuttlesworth. He would not be playing for Lincoln High, right? He would be playing for Montverde.
Ray Allen's kid. Right. He would be Ray Allen's kid.
And he would be at some prep school in Utah. I guess that one, or he would be in, Florida or whatever. He would not be in Coney Island anymore. Like, that would be like, there's zero chance that Jesus Shuttlesworth would be playing for his local Coney Island high school. That is true. Yeah.
Yeah. We're nearing the point, or we will arrive at it in the future, where that movie will just seem totally bizarre to a young person watching it. And
he's like,
is that bad? Does that hurt the sport?
Yeah. That is how I launched into the article, right? Which was just this question of, why do we watch sports at some elemental level? What is the narratives that matter? And how much do they matter still? Right now, there was a period of time where I think that we can all agree that those things were overcooked and silly, but that doesn't mean that they don't exist. That doesn't mean that the emotional core of when the kid starts watching the game, starts getting interested to it, starts idolizing somebody like Allen Iverson or whoever, that sort of narrative isn't baked in. And with basketball, it's always been that. It's always been that. And it's always been black kid from the inner city makes it. That's the story, right? The other story is like working class kid from Indiana makes it. Those are the two stories. And basketball really does, I do think, has gotten away from it in a way and it's very subtle. But that I wonder sometimes when I talk to my friends who are basketball fans and who are basketball writers or whoever, people who really love the game, and they quietly complain that maybe there's something missing about their interest in why things are, in their interest in the game, their emotional attachment to the game. I wonder if it might be the fact that what we are seeing on the court is largely a group of upper middle class kids at this point, with exceptions, obviously. Who, and why they gravitate towards players who like Anthony Edwards or whatever is because they seem like throwbacks to the old NBA. And that's sort of the flip side of the question you asked, I think, somewhat provocatively a couple of years ago, Ethan, where you were saying like, well, is the fact that the NBA can't produce a star because there's too many Europeans, right? I think the add-on question to that is like, is it also because the American stars just don't translate into that narrative in the same way that they used to? And I don't know. I think that's an interesting question to ask. And I know that like all the stat heads and everything like that are going to get mad about it, but like, you know, you guys aren't the only NBA fans. You know, like, not everyone who likes the NBA is like dissecting it all at like a micro level, right? Like they're just sort of in it because they like the narratives and they like the teams, they like the players. And so I don't know, that was sort of the larger question that I was asking.
I think it's when we talk about something like this and a question like that is taken as provocative, people read blame into it or somebody's being slighted, but instead it's this more complicated, almost game theoretical issue where we've just arrived at a point that's nobody's fault, but I don't necessarily like what we've all collectively done. And that's what this feels like. I mean, we can't go back in time. We can't go to the past. Trying to get guys to play like they did back in the day would just get Team USA's ass kicked by the other countries who were optimizing their asses off. And it's nobody's fault that it's become a suburban and player parent sport and that those were the advantages. But yet we've lost something, and there is, it's not just nostalgia. There is less of a romance to it. It is a little bit more bloodless. There is a sterility to it. And yeah, you can make the comparison to it's no European player's fault for getting great at basketball. That's not good for them. That's wonderful, but it just doesn't translate to the American customer, and that's nobody's fault, but that's just what it is, that the American customer perhaps preferred American rags to riches versus the reality that we're all seeing.